So Daggerheart's been out for a bit, and I did it. I got to play it, I got to try out the game, and I have some thoughts. So first, big elephant in the room that I want to talk about. I understand that I'm not going to be getting the biggest grasp of Daggerheart in a few days, and only maybe after like a few sessions of this. And also, that's kind of the point here too. For a game that is designed specifically and kind of advertised to be very rules light, the content is dense. Weighing in at a solid 400 pages, this is a very hefty read. Yet, despite this, the game is surprisingly very easy to get started in as a new player. However, the effort side that's needed for a DM to get started is much heavier. And granted, this isn't particularly an uncommon issue, this is actually kind of how it is with D&D too. So, as a DM, you need to learn tons of rules, mechanics, and the like to act as the arbiter of what can and can't happen within your campaign. And as a player, you really only need to know what stuff you and your character can do. However, with Daggerheart, what seems to be the biggest thing you need to learn is how to flow. And you might be thinking, Smiles, I have to learn how to flow? What the hell does that even mean? Exactly. This is something that is going to be very different for each and every person playing Daggerheart, and even too, with Daggerheart, I think it's going to be its saving grace as well as the nail in its coffin. Very rules-light systems will often rely much heavier on narrative focus and direction rather than nitty-gritty mechanics to dictate what happens, and the fear and hope die really forces Daggerheart to be narratively mechanical. For example, looking closer at the fear and hope die, on the surface, I really thought this was just a mechanical die that powers attacks, abilities, and so on. However, there's a lot more to it. This is a die that challenges players to keep track of their resources and use them in creative ways, and especially challenges DMs to create and build out their world. Fear dies grants the ability for the DM to essentially add in challenges and mechanics to the players that might not have necessarily been planned at the start of the game. Your players could be fighting bandits and then someone rolls a fear die, then all of a sudden, this fear die enables you, the DM, to drop in another bandit for them to fight. And that's completely not even out of the rules of the possibility of what you can do with fear die. And personally, this is just my mechanical gremlin brain speaking here, but I feel like that leaves a lot open to interpretation, especially for a new time DM. What does happen when a character rolls with fear? As all eyes pan over to the new DM that is trying to figure out the answer to that question for themselves too. I like the idea behind the fear and hope die. I think it's refreshing, but when it comes to the fear die, I do feel like it's both needed and not. Let's lower the DM screens for a moment. We've all been there. We've all given our enemies a few more hit points or thrown in a few more minis or mechanics into the map that maybe we didn't intend to at the beginning of the session. We improvise. It's natural. It's what we do. And personally, I don't feel like I need a fear die to tell me that I have that permission. So for me, mechanically, it seems redundant that a die is telling me, yes, now is the time for you to improvise something for the players to deal with. And yes, while I understand that the improvisation is an important part of ttrpgs, D&D is much more reliant on mechanics than it feels like Daggerheart is. Saying this the best way that I can, for Daggerheart, it feels more like improvisation is the mechanic, as if the mechanics itself are made to help better facilitate narration and improvisation itself, which I don't feel like we have as much of in D&D. And also, too, that's not saying that we don't have improvisation or things that help facilitate narration or things of the like in D&D. I'm just saying that it feels like you just have so much more emphasis and direction on that side being fueled by Daggerheart's mechanics versus D&D's. And even, too, we see this flow and looseness even within combat. The initiative system, or lack thereof, is something that really stands out to me. And personally, I do like having something more fleshed out to say who goes when, and that way you can keep a better track of things on your turn. Even too with movement, they don't give super tangible measurements with how far a character or just another NPC or creature can move on their turn. Using things like, the standard size of a pencil or a coin to dictate estimates of range. In addition, when it comes to the fear die and the whole fear mechanic within Daggerheart, I think it personally would have worked a lot better if a lot of the enemy NPCs and stat blocks have sort of like a recharge ability that's fueled by the fear die. And, you might be thinking, okay, well, yeah, the Wraith in the Daggerheart adventure actually has an ability like that, and other sorts of creatures do have those abilities. My issue is that I do find Daggerheart to be very free-flowing, and I do think it would help provide DMs, if they wanted a bit more structure, to be able to have certain abilities that each and every creature could use to benefit from fear. So in that way, if they're kind of running a blank where they're like, oh, I don't really know what to do because my players rolled with fear, but I also don't really think it's a great call to just keep throwing monsters at them, or just keep throwing some sort of like debuff at them just on the fly. This way it can provide a little bit more structure that they can work with, and that way it's less overwhelming. And I feel like especially for new time DMs, this is something that's going to be much easier to figure out and break down. I feel like mechanically, there isn't a ton of framework for DMs to run things with this. And honestly, too, that isn't even really a critique. I honestly feel like this is more of a stylistic thing for me personally. And honestly, at this point in the video, you might have heard everything that I've been saying about Daggerheart and be like, yeah, man, that sounds awesome. I've been needing a game like this. What's your deal? Why are you hating on this? Honestly, I'm not. In regards to my thoughts on Daggerheart, now that I've really had the opportunity to dig deeper into the rules and play it, I want to preface that I don't think by any means that Daggerheart is this unsalvageable game. I personally had a lot of fun playing it, and I understand that right now it's in its testing stages. I know earlier I mentioned that the game was a whopping 400 pages, but I've also heard through the grapevine of the developers that by the end of its testing, Daggerheart should actually come in at around 250-ish. And even too, while the game might seem like it has a very high learning curve, it is very easy to start playing. Character creation feels very simple in comparison to other TTRPGs. Like, I remember making my first Kids on Broom character and my first D&D character and how long that process took me. Whereas with Daggerheart, I was making a character incredibly quickly, and I was even playing the game shortly after that. It was probably the quickest transition I've actually had into playing a TTRPG. It was amazing. And so, looking over everything that I've been saying, I think Daggerheart is a completely different experience to D&D and even to many other TTRPGs, just by the intention of what the game is trying to bring about and how it does this. The game is highly reactionary and revolves around strong narration, teamwork, cooperation, and communication. And these are traits you're definitely not going to find at every table you play. You and the players will need to figure out amongst yourselves who's doing what at what point in combat and RP and for how long too, if it calls for it. The game is much more focused on creating a story together, like really creating a story together. And this is something that I think long term isn't going to be this thing that draws in the entire D&D community. And this too is kind of what I meant before about being that final nail in the coffin in regards to Daggerheart. Yeah, honestly, I think the game has a lot of strengths to it, but also too, it is so narratively focused that I do think it's going to turn off a decent chunk of the player base in regards to TTRPGs. There are some people that just want to go in there and hack and slash like it's a video game. But then there are other people that really want to focus on creating this elaborate story. So I feel like, yeah, it's definitely going to get a lot of people coming in from D&D, especially because of Critical Role. But I also think a lot of people aren't really going to get into Daggerheart. They might try it, but I don't really think it's going to fully stick just because it's such a different kind of system. There's a lot of writing on the wall with this. I feel like Daggerheart has the ability to be insanely successful because, first of all, it is a pretty decently constructed game so far. So I feel like if they continue moving this direction, it can only go well. And also, it has the backing of Critical Role. That fact alone means that this game can go far. And as I've been saying too, with this information though, I know I said in my last video that it could be a D&D killer, but I was wrong. I don't think that this game has the ability to kill D&D, but I do think it can stand beside it and even bring other games up to their level. What I feel like really sets Daggerheart apart from D&D is essentially how the two games try to tell stories very differently. D&D is much more focused on mechanics, whereas Daggerheart is much more focused on narration. It's focused on flow. It's focused on kind of like these seamless transitions into other things and really just trying to create this team amongst yourselves. What's really going to make this game work the best is finding a group that you work insanely well with. It's possible, but not always common. And with Daggerheart, I know that this advice for the game is pretty self-explanatory, but it still is worth mentioning. When you have a game that's so much more focused on narration and storytelling, it really, really matters who you're playing this game with. Because if you've got people in your game that aren't as cooperative, if you've got people that maybe aren't as communicative, Daggerheart is probably going to have a harder time. I feel like to get into Daggerheart itself is actually quite easy. The problem is really trying to master the individual skills within this game. And honestly too, going back to what I was saying about, hey, I tried this game out myself. I was playing with a group of very experienced players who've played a bunch of different games. And even too, there were times where we did feel kind of challenged. There were times where we're trying to figure out, who's going to go first and try to just not jump over each other. And these are problems that are even common in just other ttrpgs, but it feels like with something like Daggerheart where there's less structure, it feels like these problems are more likely to happen. And I think that's one of the biggest concerns that I have about Daggerheart is while it has focus and while it has a lot of interesting features, and it has kind of more of a shape than a structure, in my opinion. You really need that structure to help guide new players, new DMs, and even to just people who are switching over to the game to try to just give yourself kind of a footing to get comfortable with. A lot of it might just be trial and error, but at this point in the game, that's just kind of how it feels like the tests are going. At least from my experience. If you had a somewhat different experience, or, even if you agree with what I'm saying, or I honestly just want to say something different or whatever, let me know in the comments below. Because I'm very curious to see what everyone's take on Daggerheart is at the moment, because, this is a very interesting kind of time we found ourselves in. Regardless, though, that's all my thoughts right now after having played Daggerheart. If you've played it, let me know what you think about the game so far in the comments below. And if you enjoyed my little rant here about Daggerheart and where I think it's going to go and, just my own take on it, then please like this video and subscribe for potentially even more Daggerheart and other TTRPG content and ideas. And in the meantime, keep smiling, keep scheming, and I'll see all of you next time.